Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to this episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined today by Bridget Johnson. Bridget is the founder of Dean's Roundtable, and this is her second time on the podcast. I really
It
love it when I have
is.
guests return to continue conversations. And so we're going to pick up on a conversation that we had before about how student life is really the glue that holds so much of the school together. And as I'm thinking about it from the context of the work that I do around financial sustainability and business model innovation, there is a direct line from student life to the business model. And we're going to get into all of
Absolutely.
this in a little bit. But before we do, Bridget Johnson, my friend, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Peter. I love being a repeat guest, so thanks so much.
And I have to say that, Bridget, you have to talk a little bit about your podcast because you've got a podcast that you publish regularly. It's got a big audience, and it's fun. Like we're both like doing the podcast thing. So, and if you're watching the video on YouTube, you're gonna see she's got the good mic, just like I have the good mic. So like this is it makes it makes my life really easy on the editing side of, when I produce it. But before we get going, can you introduce yourself and Dean's Roundtable?
Absolutely. So again, Bridget Johnson, founder Dean's Roundtable, which started back in 2012, really as just a place for deans of students to gather, network, commiserate, because there wasn't any professional development specifically for deans, and so out of that came a really robust conference that we've been running for a long time. And after the first year, we had 40 people come, and we were like, oh, I guess we got something here. And so, we've done that all the while with keeping the idea of we just want to get these people together to be able to support each other. The work is hard; it's mostly thankless, and so you need some spaces and places where you can network and support. So that's where the Dean's Roundtable started. We've expanded a bit now, not just deans, but what I like to call student life professionals, because there are lots of folks that work with students outside the classroom that could use support and are sometimes one of one on their campuses. And so that's this kind of support that we're looking to provide for people. We do that through newsletter, blog posts, and the table, which is the podcast that I've been doing since November of 24, which seems crazy because I never thought that I'd be podcasting, but here we are. And so it's really just a resource for people. Really want get people talking about the topics that are really important in schools, and so that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, it's terrific. And when we last spoke, we were kind of chatting about this idea that student professionals are the glue that hold the school together, but yet
Yep,
they're the least resourced, right? And
exactly.
um, why do you think that disconnect persists?
Because student life work is highly relational, and relationships are really difficult to quantify in what I call the traditional school metrics, right? And so when student life functions well, it often becomes invisible because the community simply feels stable, connected, healthy, all those positive things. And independent schools have historically, prioritized academics as a primary, driver of institutional value. That's what they look at. How are we kind of measuring and using those metrics to measure? And many schools still view student life as supportive rather than strategic infrastructure. Schools market belonging, wellness, community heavily, but often underfund those systems, need to consistently drive or deliver those expectations. And student life offices are frequently built reactively over time instead of through, thoughtful organizational design. And then the work often relies too heavily on emotional labor and goodwill rather than sustainable structures and staffing. And so then leadership teams often sometimes underestimate how much student life impacts enrollment, retention, parent trust, and school reputation.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but it's so interesting. When I talk with schools, and I've got some presentations that I've given over time, and I talk about
Yep.
how when parents, parents invest in a school, right? They're invested in
Hmm.
the school. The return on that investment is that their child is going to have some sort of transformational outcome, right? It could be
Exactly.
academic, social, emotional, whatever. It could be any number of things, right?
Yep.
Really important.
Hmm.
And, that student life piece in terms of like building good humans is such a critical component of it. And I think it's become even more important now is that just the literal competitive landscape that
Absolutely.
like there are
Absolutely.
so many options for families.
Yep.
Like this is one of the differentiators for schools.
Exactly. Value added.
100%. So, when you're working with schools and you arrive and you're kind of doing scanning and auditing what their systems and what they're making investments. When you see a school and you're starting that work, where do you typically see student life being underinvested in?
It's really interesting to look at the kind of student life office and the dean of students office, whatever you call it. People call it different things, right? And so if there's, role confusion among what the dean's lane is versus advisor versus counselor versus administration or administrators, and that's a common sign that there may be some issues there, or if they feel like there's inconsistent student family experiences depending on the adult or the division involved, because sometimes it's fine within a division, but when you go across divisions, you get a little bit of inconsistency.
Mm,
Um, and also, when teams are operating in constant firefighting mode rather than strategic planning, and you know all well about strategic planning, how important that is. And it's just as important in the student life realm, too, in terms of what you're aspiring to be, how you are managing community, and how you are dealing with the things that come from year to year. Um, High levels of burnout and emotional exhaustion upon with the student life staff is another indicator. Lack of clear systems for communication, escalation, and coordination. They often are working in silos. So the counselors are doing their own thing, the dean's office is doing their own thing, and no one's really talking. And we all know everything's connected, right? You
yeah.
can't. It's a body. It's not just one part. I need the hand just as much as I need the eye and the ear. So we need to coordinate. And then over reliance on a few highly relational adults to hold everything together. I see that a lot often as well, because they're good at it, right? And so we're not spreading the wealth. We're letting those people kind of manage all the things and take on the hard things. Also, meetings dominated by crisis management with very little time for prevention or reflection or even debriefing. Like I can't say this enough. Like schools need to debrief, debrief, debrief. They need to spend time talking about what worked, what didn't work, how are people feeling after the thing happened, what do we want to do differently, and that's for crisis situations. That's just major events on campus.
Yeah.
People don't spend that time doing that debrief, and it's really super important. And so also the other thing that I see is student life teams functioning without sufficient administrative authority or institutional alignment. So they're often just kind of doing this thing out here. And, sometimes the administration backs them and sometimes they don't. And so that's really hard as well. And then the last thing I'll say is like weak feedback loops between student life and academics and admissions and the administration or the leadership. And so if you're not talking about what's happening on campus, if we're not connecting those dots between all of those things, then you're going to get an uneven, inconsistent experience for students on campus, and you don't want that.
So I got a couple follow-ups to this. I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that brings to mind is when I do the operating system work with schools, a big part of that work is helping to break down silos.
Mm.
Like, because what you often, and this isn't just like, I always like to say this, it's not just schools. Like, you go to any
Oh,
industry,
absolutely.
this
Yes.
is like a thing, right?
It's a thing.
It's a thing. But, like, how can you get you don't want that situation where one office is saying, "Well, we're gonna do our thing because that other office is doing theirs." Like, no, that's not
Hmm.
the way it works because everything's
Exactly.
interconnected.
Everything is connected.
The other question I have is when you talked about role confusion, can you expand on that just a little bit? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, sometimes, especially between whether it's, the dean's office and the counseling office, sometimes, especially those things, while we want them to be mutual exclusive, aren't, right?
Yeah,
Student life and student well-being and mental health are really connected. And so you want to make sure that those folks are working together harmoniously, not that I can't talk to you or we can't talk to each other, we can't collaborate on something because you do discipline and I do, student health. And so that's a problem,
yeah,
because sometimes you want to give students some different pathways to not healing but support, right? And so when that looks like is if a student comes to the dean's office and says, I want to talk to you about something, I want to be able to say, like, before you tell me something, let's see if this is a counseling issue or if it's a dean's office issue, because I want to point you in the right direction before I have to act as the dean. And so if your roles are clear and you're not worried about, well, if you do that, then there are no consequences. that's not what the goal is. The goal is the health of the student, right? And
Yeah.
so if you want to be able to provide those different pathways, everyone has to be working using the same language and having the same idea of what that support should look like.
Yeah. Bridget, I've been noticing kind of a bit of a trend here where enrollment leaders are talking about how re-enrollment is or retention is now the new admission. Just given
Mm,
that in
yeah.
some markets the funnels are just getting smaller and
Smaller.
certain,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, so you've got to be really dialed in on the retention piece.
Yeah.
And I know you've talked a lot about how the connection between student life and admission outcomes. So,
Mhm.
as you're talking to schools, how should folks see these things as linked? Because, in my mind,
Yeah.
they're clearly linked, but like when you're talking to them, how would you
Clearly
articulate that?
linked.
Yeah,
Yeah, because families enroll initially, usually because of the academics and the reputation, but they stay because of the experience and the relationships. And
100%.
so, yeah, so that's the thing. That's really the crux of it. And so parents will ask, my child going to be known here? Will someone notice if they're struggling? Will this school care for my child as a whole person, not just come this academic being or this athlete? And so
Yep.
those experiences are largely shaped through the student life systems, which are advisory, discipline, counseling and wellness support, communication, and community culture. And so retention problems are often culture and experience problems, not just admissions problems, right? And so family word of mouth is shaped heavily by how schools handle difficult moments. And if they don't handle them well, word gets out. And so schools underestimate how much relational trust influences enrollment sustainability. Student life is one of the most overlooked enrollment strategies that schools have. And like you just talked about, it's a competitive enrollment landscape right now, and culture and strategy can't be separated.
Yeah. Do you think that's because of maybe the silo piece that we were talking about before, or
Oh,
is it just
sure.
hasn't necessarily been like institutionally designed so that it works that way?
Well, I don't. I think we just, again, I said earlier, when things are working well, people kind of take that for granted, right? And they just think that it's just going to naturally work itself out. Like there's no intentionality or structure or planning that needs to go into that. And we're seeing more and more now that you actually really need to be intentional about your student life, your culture, and your community in order for it to go well, and have systems in place so that people actually know what to do. There's no system or structure, you leave it to chance, and that's actually also a choice, and that's not a good one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You've also talked about how student life is can be connected to alumni engagement and giving, which I
Mhm.
think is fascinating. So walk us through how that connection and how like healthy systems and a healthy student life actually produces, alumni results downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. Healthy student life creates long-term relational attachment to an institution. Alumni primarily remember people and experiences, not institutional structures, not necessarily their chemistry class or, their math class, but they remember advisors, coaches, deans, dorm parents, moments of support and belonging. And student life builds relational capital that lasts long after graduation. So that's what those folks hold on to after they leave campuses. And so whether you decide whether or not you want to give back to a school or you want to kind of be connected with that community largely based on how you feel when you were there and as you were leaving. And so advancement and alumni engagement are delayed reflections of the student experience. And so alumni are more likely to give back to communities where they felt known, where they felt valued, where they felt connected, where they felt supported. Strong community experiences create long term institutional loyalty. And what that means is they'll come back, they'll volunteer, they'll give money. And what we're seeing now is like younger alumni, especially, increasingly expect alignment between school values and lived experiences. And
Yeah.
so if they're not feeling that,
Right.
they're not engaging. And so healthy student life produce graduates who remain emotionally connected to their schools. And when they're emotionally connected, they're gonna go all out. They're gonna do everything they can to make sure that community still continues to thrive.
I love how you called it a delayed reaction. I had never thought of it that way, but that is so
Yeah.
true. That's a great construct. Um, on a slightly like darker note, I know like when things go wrong in student life, like stuff gets serious and fast,
Yes, 0
right?
to 100. Mhm.
Right, like reputation damage, legal
Yeah.
issues, right, all kinds of things. So how do you help boards understand the proper investments in student life? Simply, I mean, even just thinking about it from risk management, like this is just
Absolutely.
good on top of being obviously the culture is driving it, but the risk management piece is important too.
Absolutely, because I say invest now so you don't have to pay later, right? And so
I love
most
it.
major school crises emerge from gaps in systems, communication, supervision, or accountability. So, kind of those are the areas. And so, under resourced student life systems create institutional vulnerability. And so, you don't want to, be on the receiving end of that. Weak structures increase the likelihood of inconsistent responses, documentation failures, communication breakdowns, and preventable escalation. So things get escalated that if you had just had proper systems in place would never have happened. So schools often rely too heavily on, like I said earlier, those heroic individuals who will kind of swoop in and take care of everything rather than a real durable system. And so making sure that you have clear protocols and trained adults reduce both operational and legal risks for sure. And strong relational trust allows concerns to surface earlier before crises actually escalate. And so, if you have that trust and you can have those conversations, you have the proper systems in place, and everyone's connected and not siloed, then you have effective student life systems, and that improve. You have coordination, consistency, transparency, and good decision making under pressure, which that's the other piece, right? And so you see oftentimes it's not that people had bad intentions, it's just they were under pressure, they skipped a step, they didn't do the thing that they were supposed to do because under pressure they operated differently because there was no real system in place. And so families really judge schools based on how they respond in difficult moments. I said that
Yeah.
earlier. And so, student life investment is not just culture work, it's governance, it's operational strategy, and institutional protection.
So, I imagine that these conversations have like I'm guessing the student life professionals are having these conversations like
Absolutely.
how do we get the investment and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so there's an opportunity to manage up there,
Yes.
right? Managing up to the head of school to get the head of school aligned with what you're seeing. And then the
Mhm.
head of school then needs to manage up to the board so that the
Right.
board can see it and make this an institutional priority as well. So walk
Exactly.
me through like how do we go through that managing up process in order to build the systems that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so it really does start with, thinking about how you are operating on a daily basis, right? And so sometimes, you say all these things, you're like, oh my God, that just seems like way too much. I don't have the bandwidth or the time to kind of have these conversations or do these things. But we actually start with low hanging fruit, right? There
Mm,
are ways that you can kind of look at what's happening on your campus and see how things are going and provide some real data to your head, who can also, send that to the board about how things are operating. And one way to do that is look at kind of your discipline process and see what's happening there. Over time, like how has discipline been going? Have you getting more discipline, less discipline, and who's being affected or who's coming through the process in terms of gender, grade, social economics, all those things matter. And so when you look at those things and being able to present a picture and then say strategically how we want to combat some of those things, whether it's programming, whether it's consistency with the adults and the training, whether it's through advisory, there's some low hanging fruit that can really produce some results pretty early on that can actually fuel or energize people to be excited to make those changes. But you've got to, I understand, heads of school and boards, they've got lots of different competing priorities, right? And so a lot of what heads are doing is a lot externally facing, right? And so, but still, what's happening internally can also definitely affect what's happening externally. And so, you definitely don't want to be in a situation where now something that's happened internally is now being viewed externally. And so, that's the other thing, to keep people kind of in lockstep or in arm in community and walking through this process, you need to make sure that everyone's got their eye on the prize, right? Which is supporting students and having a community where everyone's speaking the same language, everyone knows who's on first, the transparency is there, the consistency is there. And that really helps in having people have good things to say about your school, because that's really the bottom line. Like, you want people to feel good about what's happening, give you that trust, give you that benefit of the doubt so that when things do happen, they're not second guessing your decisions. They don't feel like there may be some inequity that's happening there because you've proven over time that that consistency and the process works.
Yeah, I appreciate, I really appreciate that perspective, and I imagine there may be somebody listening to this, and we're recording this kind of end of May. School year's almost
Mhm.
done for a lot of schools. Fiscal year is wrapping up in about a
Yep.
month or so. So my guess is there's going to be some sessions at leadership team levels around annual planning for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And if they are, if they're starting to think, we really need to strengthen this component, this aspect of our school, but we're not sure where to start. What would you advise them if somebody said, Bridget, like, where do we need to start? Like, what should we do? What should we do first?
Yeah, so just look at the systems that you have on your campus, right? Look at are you doing what you say you're going to do, right? And what where are the pain points? Where is was there tension or uncomfortableness throughout this school year? Is that a pattern? And if that's a pattern, let's look at kind of the root cause of that issue and tackle it that way. So it's not like you have to go in and like blow up everything that you've done, but
Yeah.
let's take a look at some small areas of school where sometimes get overlooked, right? One place you can look is actually your advisory program, right? And thinking about, like, do we feel like students are getting a consistent experience with their advisor? And if not, let's talk about why not. Have the advisors been trained? Do they know their role or the goal or the purpose of advisory? Has that been communicated to students and also to families? And have you given the adults the proper tools to be able to do that work? Do they have the proper time? Looking at your calendar, looking at your schedule, the things that, where you look at your schedule and your budget, and that's what what's most important to you, right? And so when you look at those things and you say, oh, student life is not getting a lot of love or shine, then there needs to be some conversations about kind of what needs to shift and where the resources need to go.
Yeah, I love how you point out the schedule, right? Like, because that's where we did a podcast episode with Mira Shaw not long ago, and she talked about how the schedule is the ultimate reflection of what you value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's
Absolutely.
so
So
true. It's
that's
all there.
you can really start there. Look at
Yeah.
your schedule. How are you allocating your time? But then secondly, look at your budget. How are you allocating your resources? So that's a great place to start.
Bridget Johnson, founder of Dean's Roundtable. If somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. I can be reached at Bridget at deansroundtable.org. You can also find me on LinkedIn. We're also now on TikTok and Instagram, the Dean's Roundtable. So you can find us there. We're all over the place.
Yeah, and tell them where to subscribe to your pod.
Absolutely. So the table, actually, if you just go to our website, you can find all of the podcast episodes there. But we're on YouTube, we are on Spotify, and we're on Apple Podcast.
Yeah, awesome. Bridget Johnson, thank you so much. And for those of you in Moonshot Lab, hang tight. We're going to have an extended version of the conversation coming up just in a second. But again, Bridget Johnson, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Peter.